1 year later, I stood in the conference room of Phoenix Marketing's new headquarters, looking out at the city skyline. The company valuation had hit $10 million, exceeding even our most optimistic projections. 50 employees worked across 3 floors, creating campaigns that had revolutionized how brands connected with audiences. But the view that morning wasn't what held my attention. It was the email on my phone from Harrison, Derek sentenced to 5 years. Diane took plea deal, 2 years plus restitution. Your mother filed for bankruptcy. Your father's divorce is final. I felt nothing reading those words. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a strange emptiness where my anger used to live. They were just names now, people who'd once held power over me but had become footnotes in a story I was no longer writing. My story had moved beyond them. You ready for this? James asked, entering with coffee. We'd been together 6 months officially, after he'd waited patiently for me to trust again. He was everything Derek wasn't, secure in himself, genuinely proud of my success, and most importantly, kind. His family's venture firm was about to announce Phoenix Marketing as their flagship investment, but that wasn't why I was with him. I was with him because he saw me clearly and loved what he saw. The conference room filled with my team for our Monday morning meeting. These people had become my chosen family. Amy, now our VP of Strategy, who'd earned back my trust through consistent action. Sophia, our creative director, whose faith in me had never wavered. Even Michael, who'd finally broken free from our parents and joined as our head of digital innovation. He was thriving away from their toxic influence. Before we start, I announced, I want to share something. Today marks exactly 1 year since I moved into Michael's secret apartment with nothing but $500 and a broken heart. Today, we're announcing the Phoenix Foundation, a nonprofit that will provide resources and mentorship to people escaping abusive relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional. The room erupted in applause. This had been my dream, turning my pain into purpose. The foundation would offer what I desperately needed. Emergency housing, legal resources, career counseling, and most importantly, proof that life could begin again after betrayal. That afternoon, I was scheduled to speak at my alma mater about entrepreneurship. As I prepared my notes, my assistant knocked. Brianna? There's a man here who says he's your father. Should I call security? I paused, then made a decision. Send him in. But stay close. Thomas Chen entered my office, looking like a shadow of the man who'd stood silent while his wife destroyed me. His hair was gray now, his expensive suit replaced by simple clothes. He looked nervous, humble even. Thank you for seeing me, he began, sitting only when I gestured. I know I don't deserve your time. I waited, saying nothing. Let him fill the silence for once. I've been in therapy, he continued. Learning about enabling and codependency. I was weak, Brianna. I let your mother control everything because it was easier than standing up to her. I failed you as a father. Yes, you did, I agreed simply. What do you want? He pulled out an envelope, hands shaking slightly. The divorce settlement. I'm giving you what should have been yours. It's not about the money. It's about acknowledging what we took from you. Inside was a check for $50,000. The amount meant nothing to me now, but the gesture held weight. I don't want your money, I said. Give it to the Phoenix Foundation. They'll use it to help other people whose families failed them. His eyes filled with tears then, real ones. I'm proud of you, he said. Not for your success, though that's remarkable. I'm proud that you didn't let us break your spirit. You became better, not bitter. I had help, I admitted. People who showed me what real family looks like. Michael, Sophia, Elena, my team. They taught me that blood doesn't make family. Love, respect, and loyalty do. He nodded, understanding this was goodbye. As he left, he turned back. Your mother still blames everyone else. Diane too. But I know the truth. we did this. I'm sorry it took losing you to see it. That evening's speech at the university was supposed to be about business strategy. Instead, I talked about rebuilding after betrayal. The auditorium was packed, students and faculty listening intently as I shared the real story behind Phoenix Marketing's success. The worst thing that can happen to you might also be the best, I told them. When I lost everything, I thought my life was over. But it was actually beginning. Every rejection taught me to rely on myself. Every lie they spread showed me the value of truth. Every attempt to break me made me stronger. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you already have everything you need within yourself. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. My family disowned me for choosing my own career path. How do you deal with the guilt? I saw myself in her eyes, that familiar pain of rejecting family expectations. Guilt is their weapon, not your burden, I answered. You can love people and still refuse to let them destroy you. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. After the speech, Elena waited in the lobby. My mentor had become more like a mother to me, showing me what maternal love should look like. You've graduated, she said simply. You don't need me anymore. I hugged her tightly. I'll always need you. But now I can give back too. The Phoenix Foundation launch event was scheduled for the following month. We'd already received massive support from the business community. James's family foundation pledged matching funds. Several of my clients offered pro bono services. Even my old company, now a client, contributed significantly. Harold had publicly apologized for letting me go, calling it the worst business decision he'd ever made. As I planned the launch, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Kate. I wanted you to know Derek tried to contact me from prison. He's still blaming everyone but himself. But I'm good now. Really good. I started my own consulting firm. You saved my life, Brianna. Thank you. These calls came regularly now. Women who'd seen my story and found strength to leave their own toxic situations. Men who'd realized they were being manipulated by narcissistic partners. Adult children breaking free from abusive parents. Each story reminded me why I'd chosen to be public about my journey. The night before the foundation launch, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my apartment, marveling at how different life looked now. Pictures of my chosen family covered the walls. Awards lined the shelves. But the thing I treasured most was a simple note from Michael: you showed me it was possible to break free. Because of you, I found Sophia, found my career, found myself. You didn't just save yourself. You saved me too. The launch event was beautiful. Hundreds of people gathered to support the Phoenix Foundation. Survivors shared their stories. Donors pledged resources. Corporate partners offered job training programs. It was everything I'd dreamed of creating from my pain. During my speech, I noticed someone in the back. My mother, aged beyond her years, standing alone. Security moved toward her, but I shook my head. Let her see what she'd motivated me to build. Let her witness how her cruelty had been transformed into compassion for others. She left before the end, but not before I saw the recognition in her eyes. She'd created her own worst enemy, a daughter who'd succeeded without her. As the evening wound down, James pulled me aside. In front of everyone who mattered to me, he dropped to one knee. But this wasn't Derek's showy proposal designed to trap me. This was quiet, sincere, perfect. Brianna Chen, he said, you've taught me that real strength comes from vulnerability, that success means lifting others up, and that love should make you more yourself, not less. Will you marry me? The ring was perfect, ethical, and real, just like him. Yes, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. The room erupted in genuine joy, my chosen family celebrating love built on truth rather than manipulation. Amy cried. Michael cheered. Elena smiled her knowing smile. These people who'd stood by me through the worst now got to witness the best. 6 months later, I married James in a small ceremony surrounded only by people who'd earned the right to be there. Michael walked me down the aisle, Sophia as my maid of honor, Elena officiating. My biological parents weren't invited. They'd forfeited that privilege when they'd chosen cruelty over love. During the reception, I raised a toast. They say the best revenge is success. But I've learned something better. The best revenge is happiness. It's building a life so beautiful that the people who try to destroy you become irrelevant. It's choosing love over bitterness, purpose over pettiness, growth over grudges. They thought breaking me would end me. Instead, their cruelty built an empire of compassion. I lost fake love but found my true self. Sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the first day of your real life. As James and I danced, surrounded by authentic love and genuine support, I thought about the woman crying on her ex-fiancé's couch 2 years ago. She thought her life was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. Every loss had been a redirection. Every betrayal had been a lesson. Every attempt to bury her had been planting seeds for this moment. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another message to the Phoenix Foundation from someone ready to rise from their own ashes. Tomorrow, I'd help them start their journey. Tonight, I danced with my husband, celebrated with my chosen family, and marveled at the life I'd built from ruins. They'd taken everything they could from me. But they'd failed to take what mattered most: my ability to rebuild, my capacity to trust again, my determination to transform pain into purpose. In trying to destroy me, they'd created something they never expected: a woman who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. The phoenix had risen, and she was finally, fully, free. Thank you for joining me on this journey from betrayal to triumph. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What's your phoenix moment? When did your worst day become the first day of your real life? Please hit that like button if this story inspired you, subscribe for more content about overcoming adversity, and share this with anyone who needs to hear that there's life after betrayal. Remember, sometimes being broken is just the beginning of becoming unbreakable. Until next time, keep rising. Christmas morning came with 47 missed calls and hundreds of text messages. The family group chat had exploded overnight with arguments, accusations, and choosing sides. I turned off my phone and focused on my children, trying to salvage something from the holiday. We opened presents in our pajamas, made hot chocolate, and I held them as they processed what had happened. Emma asked if Grandma really thought she was disgusting, and I had to fight back tears as I assured her she was perfect exactly as she was. By noon, I couldn't ignore the situation any longer. Aunt Martha, my mother's sister, had sent a long email demanding I apologize immediately and delete all recordings. She accused me of destroying the family over a misunderstanding and threatened that I'd be cut off from everyone if I didn't make this right. But then came a surprise. My cousin Rachel called in tears, thanking me for finally exposing what she had endured as a child. She shared how Linda had tortured her about her weight for years, leading to an eating disorder she still battled at 43. The divided reactions continued throughout the day. Some family members were appalled by what they'd witnessed and offered support, while others accused me of being dramatic and vindictive. Uncle Dan, my father's brother, sent a formal message saying he would financially support my parents' legal efforts because grandparents deserved access to their grandchildren regardless of disagreements. But Aunt Sarah called to say she was horrified by what she'd seen and heard, admitting she'd noticed troubling behaviors but hadn't wanted to interfere. I spent hours researching grandparents' rights in our state while my children played quietly. The reality was terrifying. My parents could potentially get court-ordered visitation if they could prove an existing relationship with the children and show it was in the children's best interest. Their folder of twisted evidence showed they had been preparing for exactly that. I realized they must have been planning this for at least 6 months, maybe longer, carefully building a case while pretending to be loving grandparents. Tom called from his base overseas, and I could hear the fury in his voice when I explained everything. He had always thought my parents were difficult but had no idea about the extent of their behavior. He started the emergency leave process immediately, but it would take at least a week to get home. He wanted to call my parents and rage at them, but I begged him not to give them any ammunition to use against us. We needed to be strategic now, not emotional. Diane started texting me privately, begging me not to ruin the family by going public with the recordings. She admitted she had been wrong to participate but claimed our parents had manipulated her too. She revealed they had promised to pay for Madison's Olympic training if she helped document my parenting failures. When I didn't respond, she became increasingly desperate, offering to testify on my behalf if I would just delete the messages showing her involvement. I screenshot everything instead. The worst part of the day came when I found Emma hiding in her bedroom closet, afraid to come out because she thought she was in trouble for being fat. Jake had torn up all his artwork, saying he didn't want to be a sissy anymore. Tyler had completely stopped speaking, reverting to the selective mutism we'd spent 2 years in therapy overcoming. My parents had undone years of progress in one cruel evening, and the damage was spreading. I made emergency appointments with their therapists, grateful that Dr. Morrison had a cancellation the next day. During Jake's session, which I was invited to observe, he drew picture after picture of angry faces and broken hearts. The therapist gently extracted that his grandfather had been telling him for months that boys who liked art became disappointments to their families. Emma's therapist reported signs of developing disordered eating, with Emma asking if she could stop eating altogether to make grandma love her. Tyler's speech therapist was alarmed by his complete regression and recommended intensive intervention. As if the day couldn't get worse, I heard a car in my driveway that evening and looked out to see my parents' vehicle. They had brought Harold, their lawyer friend, and were approaching my front door with determined faces. I quickly gathered the children and took them upstairs, telling them to stay in my bedroom with the door locked. When I answered the door with my phone obviously recording, Harold introduced himself formally and handed me a letter demanding immediate visitation with the children based on established grandparent relationships. The letter was professionally crafted and intimidating, citing state statutes and implying I was alienating the children from loving grandparents. My mother stood behind Harold with fake tears, claiming she just wanted to see her grandchildren and couldn't understand why I was being so cruel. My father added that they were prepared to file for emergency custody if I continued to deny them access, suggesting my mental state was unstable as evidenced by my paranoid recording behaviors. I told them to leave my property immediately or I would call the police for trespassing. Before they left, Melissa's car pulled up behind theirs. She got out despite my father's angry gestures for her to leave, marching up to my door with a thick envelope. In front of everyone, she announced that she had copies of every email, text, and document related to their conspiracy. She had been collecting evidence for 3 months, she said, ever since she overheard them discussing hiring a private investigator to stalk me. Harold's face changed as she mentioned attorney-client privilege violations and conspiracy to commit fraud. My parents retreated quickly after that, but not before my mother hissed that I would regret destroying our family. The day after Christmas, I sat in Attorney Grace Chen's office, spreading out all my evidence on her conference table. She was a family law specialist recommended by Rachel, who had used her during her own custody battle years earlier. Grace listened intently as I played the recordings, her expression growing more serious with each one. When I finished, she leaned back and told me we had a strong defensive case, but we needed to act fast. My parents had been smart to involve a lawyer early, and we were playing catch-up. Grace explained that while grandparents' rights existed in our state, they were limited and required specific circumstances. The emotional abuse documented in my recordings would work strongly in our favor, but we needed to establish a clear pattern and show how contact with my parents was detrimental to the children's well-being. She immediately filed for a restraining order based on the documented emotional abuse and the threat of kidnapping implied in their custody threats. The court would hear our emergency motion in 3 days. The private investigator revelation became our first major break. Grace subpoenaed the investigation records and discovered something shocking. The investigator, clearly uncomfortable with what he'd been asked to do, had actually documented that I was an exemplary mother. His reports noted my consistent school involvement, the children's good health and happiness, and the stable, loving home environment I provided. He had refused to manufacture negative evidence despite pressure from my parents, and his reports directly contradicted their claims of neglect. My parents responded by filing their own court documents, seeking immediate visitation rights and suggesting I was mentally unstable and alienating their grandchildren. They hired a team of 3 lawyers from a prestigious firm, showing they were willing to spend their retirement savings on this battle. Their filing included the photos and documents from their Christmas Eve folder, but Grace pointed out how their evidence actually showed healthy, normal children engaging in age-appropriate activities. A photo of Emma eating birthday cake wasn't evidence of promoted obesity, it was a child celebrating at a party. The family divide deepened as people were forced to choose sides. Uncle Dan made good on his threat to financially support my parents, even offering to pay for additional lawyers. He gave a sworn affidavit claiming he had witnessed concerning parenting from me, though when pressed for specifics, he could only cite instances of me allowing Jake to pursue art and not forcing Emma into sports. Aunt Sarah, however, provided her own affidavit detailing the emotional abuse she had witnessed my parents inflicting not just on my children but on various family members over the decades. The most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. My parents' former housekeeper, Maria, contacted Grace after hearing about the case from mutual acquaintances. She had worked for my parents for 15 years and had witnessed their treatment of me as a child and teenager. She offered to testify about the pattern of control, manipulation, and emotional abuse that had defined my upbringing. She also revealed that my mother had practiced similar behaviors with her own grandchildren from her deceased sister, who had been unable to defend them. School became another battleground when my parents attempted to pick up the children, claiming grandparent rights. The principal had to call me when they showed up with their lawyer, demanding access. I had already provided the school with copies of the restraining order filing, but it was terrifying to realize they were escalating despite legal warnings. The school resource officer had to escort them off the property when they refused to leave voluntarily, and the incident was added to our evidence file. Grace discovered something disturbing when reviewing the timeline. My parents had accessed my medical records through their friend who worked at my doctor's office, a serious HIPAA violation. They had obtained copies of my therapy records from years earlier when I was dealing with postpartum depression after Tyler's birth. They planned to use my mental health treatment against me, ignoring that seeking help was a sign of good parenting, not weakness. Grace immediately filed complaints with the medical board and added the HIPAA violation to our case. Diane finally cracked under the pressure and reached out to meet with me privately. She broke down completely, admitting that our parents had been holding her own childhood trauma over her head for years. They had promised to keep quiet about mistakes she'd made as a teenager if she helped them with their plan. She had recorded several conversations with them too, she revealed, including one where they discussed fabricating evidence if necessary. She agreed to provide everything to my lawyer and testify on my behalf. The most painful revelation came from Scott during a late-night phone call. He confessed that our parents had controlled him through financial manipulation for his entire adult life. They had co-signed his business loans and threatened to call them in if he didn't comply with their wishes. The custody threat against his own children had been the final straw. He sobbed as he apologized for not protecting my children, admitting he had been a coward. He promised to testify truthfully about everything he had witnessed and overheard. Tom finally made it home on New Year's Eve, and having him there changed everything. The children ran into his arms and didn't let go for hours. He had used his time traveling to research and prepare, creating detailed timelines of incidents I had told him about over the years that I had forgotten. His military training kicked in as he helped organize our evidence and prepare for the court battle ahead. He also made it clear to any family members who approached that he would protect his family with everything he had. The court hearing was scheduled for January 15th, and Grace warned that my parents were escalating their tactics. They had launched a social media campaign portraying themselves as heartbroken grandparents denied access to their grandchildren by a vindictive daughter. They posted old photos of happy family moments, conveniently edited to remove context. But our supporters fought back, with Rachel leading a counter-campaign that shared the truth about their abuse. Several other family members came forward with their own stories of manipulation and control. Grace sat me down the week before the hearing with a serious warning. My parents were getting desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. She had seen cases like this turn violent and urged me to upgrade our home security and vary our routines. The restraining order was just paper until it was formally granted, and even then, it only worked if they chose to obey it. She advised me to document everything, never be alone with them, and prepare for the possibility that this could get much worse before it got better. As I looked at my children playing in the next room, I knew I would do whatever it took to protect them from the people who were supposed to love them most. January 15th arrived with an ice storm that seemed fitting for the cold reality we were facing. Tom and I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed professionally and armed with binders of evidence. Grace had prepared us thoroughly, but nothing could calm the anxiety of knowing my children's safety hung in the balance. My parents arrived with their 3 lawyers and a group of character witnesses, including Uncle Dan and several family friends who barely knew my children but were willing to testify about what wonderful grandparents they were. The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, had a reputation for seeing through manipulation and prioritizing children's welfare. She began by reviewing the emergency restraining order request, and Grace presented our evidence methodically. The recordings were played in the courtroom, and I watched my parents' lawyers' confident expressions falter as they heard the clear emotional abuse. The Christmas Eve video was particularly damaging, showing my children crying as their grandparents listed their failures and announced their custody plans. When it was time for testimony, we had arranged for Emma to testify via closed-circuit television from a comfortable room with a child advocate present. My brave 8-year-old spoke clearly about how Grandma's words made her feel ugly and worthless, how she had started hiding food because she was afraid of being called fat. She told the judge that she loved her grandparents but was scared of them, that she had nightmares about being taken away from Mommy. When asked what she wanted, she said she just wanted them to stop being mean. Jake's therapist, Dr. Morrison, testified next about the significant emotional damage inflicted by the grandparents' consistent attacks on his interests and identity. She explained how Jake had been flourishing in his artistic pursuits until the criticism intensified, leading to destroyed artwork and self-harm behaviors. She presented drawings Jake had made showing himself torn between 2 versions, one colorful and happy, one gray and acceptable to grandfather. Her professional opinion was that continued forced contact would cause severe psychological harm. Tyler's speech therapist, Ms. Jennifer Park, provided compelling testimony about his regression. She showed videos of Tyler's progress over 2 years, speaking confidently and clearly, contrasted with his current selective mutism triggered by anxiety around his grandparents. She explained how their mockery and impatience had undone years of therapy in a matter of months. The court watched footage of Tyler practicing saying Grandpa clearly, only to be laughed at and called a baby when he finally managed it. My parents' lawyers tried to argue that the recordings were illegally obtained and should be inadmissible. Grace countered with state law clearly permitting one-party consent recording, especially in cases involving child welfare. The judge agreed, noting that the content of the recordings was highly relevant regardless of how they were obtained. The lawyers then pivoted to arguing that grandparents naturally worry about their grandchildren's welfare and that their concerns, while perhaps inelegantly expressed, came from a place of love. When Linda took the stand, she presented herself as a heartbroken grandmother denied access to grandchildren she adored. She cried delicately into a handkerchief, claiming I had misunderstood their attempts to help and guide the children. But Grace's cross-examination was devastating. She played Linda's voice calling Emma disgusting and asked her to explain how that was helpful guidance. She presented the text messages planning to manipulate situations and asked how that showed love. Linda became flustered, eventually snapping that someone needed to save those children from my permissive parenting. Robert's testimony went even worse. He maintained his composure initially, presenting himself as a concerned grandfather worried about his grandson's development. But when Grace questioned him about forcing the boys to fight each other, he lost his temper. He shouted that boys needed to be tough, that I was raising weak children who would be victims all their lives. The judge had to call for order when he stood up and pointed at me, calling me a failure as a daughter and mother. His true character was on full display, and his lawyers looked defeated. The private investigator, Marcus Webb, provided unexpected powerful testimony. He explained how uncomfortable he had been with the assignment to find dirt on me, and how he had considered it unethical when he found only evidence of good parenting. He testified that in his 20-year career, he had rarely seen a more devoted mother. He also revealed that my parents had asked him to stage photographs and create misleading evidence, which he had refused to do. His testimony directly contradicted their claims of neglect. Melissa testified about the conspiracy she had witnessed, providing emails and recorded conversations where my parents discussed their plans in detail. She revealed that they had been planning this for over a year, not out of concern for the children but from a desire to maintain control. One email from Linda stated clearly that she needed to fix the mistakes I was making before the children were ruined forever. Another from Robert discussed how having custody would allow them to raise the children properly this time. The most dramatic moment came when Diane took the stand for our side. She broke down as she admitted to participating in the scheme, explaining how our parents had manipulated her with promises of money and threats of revealing past mistakes. She authenticated the group messages and confirmed that the entire Christmas Eve confrontation had been orchestrated. She apologized directly to my children, who were not present but would hear about her testimony later, for failing to protect them from their grandparents' cruelty. Maria, my parents' former housekeeper, provided historical context that proved this was a long-standing pattern. She testified about witnessing similar emotional abuse directed at me throughout my childhood, including weight shaming, criticism of interests, and manipulation. She revealed that my mother had once told her that children were like clay to be molded and that she had failed with me but wouldn't make the same mistakes with her grandchildren. Her testimony established a generational pattern of abuse. The judge also reviewed written affidavits from family members on both sides. Uncle Dan's support of my parents fell flat when his statement could only cite my allowing the children to pursue their interests as concerning behavior. In contrast, affidavits from teachers, coaches, and other parents painted a picture of well-adjusted, loved children with a devoted mother. The school principal's statement about my parents' attempted unauthorized pickup particularly concerned the judge. My parents' case crumbled further when their HIPAA violation came to light. Grace presented evidence that they had illegally obtained my medical records, including therapy notes from postpartum depression treatment. The judge was visibly angry that they would weaponize mental health treatment against me, noting that seeking help for postpartum depression showed responsibility, not weakness. She ordered an immediate investigation into the violation and suggested criminal charges might be appropriate. In closing arguments, my parents' lawyers tried one last desperate attempt, arguing that mistakes in expressing concern shouldn't result in grandparents losing access to grandchildren they loved. They suggested supervised visitation as a compromise. But Grace's closing was powerful, systematically showing how my parents had engaged in calculated emotional abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and illegal activities all aimed at stealing children from a fit parent. She asked the judge to see past the tears and manipulation to protect 3 vulnerable children from their abusers. Judge Williams retired to consider her decision but returned in less than an hour. Her ruling was comprehensive and damning. She found that my parents had engaged in systematic emotional abuse of minor children, had conspired to fraudulently obtain custody, and had shown no remorse or understanding of their harmful actions. She granted the permanent restraining order with no visitation rights, ordered them to pay all my legal fees, and recommended criminal investigation for the HIPAA violation and attempted fraud. She also ordered them to undergo psychological evaluation and therapy if they ever hoped to petition the court again in the future. As we left the courtroom, my mother screamed that I would regret this, that family was everything and I had destroyed ours. My father said nothing, but his cold stare promised this wasn't over. But surrounded by Tom, Grace, and the family members who had stood by us, I felt stronger than I had in years. We had won this battle, but I knew the war for my family's peace was just beginning. The immediate aftermath of the court victory was both relieving and chaotic. While we had legal protection, the emotional fallout continued. My parents sent one final letter through their lawyer, a masterpiece of manipulation that alternated between expressing devastation at losing their grandchildren and subtle threats about the consequences of my choices. Grace forwarded it directly to the prosecutor's office as evidence of continued harassment despite the restraining order. That was the last direct communication we received from them. The family divide became permanent in the months that followed. Some relatives, unable to accept the truth about my parents, cut contact with us entirely. Uncle Dan sent a brief message saying I had killed my parents' spirit and he could never forgive me. Others who had initially supported my parents reached out quietly to apologize, saying they hadn't known the full extent of the abuse. The family that had once gathered 25 strong for holidays was fractured beyond repair, but the pieces that remained were stronger and healthier. We created new traditions to replace the painful memories. That first Easter without extended family, we invited Rachel and her children, Melissa and her kids after she separated from Scott, and Sarah who had become like a real aunt to my children. We dyed eggs without criticism, had an egg hunt without competition, and ate candy without anyone counting calories. Emma smiled genuinely for the first time in months, Jake proudly wore a purple shirt he had decorated himself, and Tyler read a poem he had written about spring. These small moments of healing meant everything. The children's recovery was gradual but steady. Emma's therapy focused on developing a healthy relationship with food and her body. We removed all scales from the house and focused on how foods made us feel rather than numbers. She slowly stopped hiding food and began to trust that she could eat when hungry without judgment. The day she asked for seconds at dinner without fear, I had to excuse myself to cry happy tears in the bathroom. She was learning that her worth had nothing to do with her size. Jake flourished once the criticism stopped. His art teacher nominated him for a district-wide competition, and his piece about family depicted our new chosen family in brilliant colors. He started wearing whatever made him happy, including nail polish when he felt like it, and no one said a word except to compliment his color choices. His therapist reported that the angry drawings had been replaced by vibrant expressions of joy and creativity. He even started teaching Tyler to paint, their bond growing stronger without grandparents trying to pit them against each other. Tyler's speech improvement was remarkable once the source of his anxiety was removed. Within 3 months, he was back to his previous progress level. His therapist introduced him to a support group for children with speech differences, where he made friends who understood his journey. By summer, he was volunteering to read aloud in class and had joined the school's drama club. The boy who had gone silent from fear was finding his voice again, stronger than ever. Tom's decision to leave overseas contracting and find local work transformed our family dynamic. He found a position with a security firm that allowed him to be home every night. Having both parents present meant the children never felt vulnerable, and Tom's steady presence helped them feel protected. He also started teaching them healthy ways to handle conflict and stand up for themselves, skills they would need as they grew older in a world that could be cruel. 6 months after the court ruling, Scott reached out to reconnect. He had been in therapy dealing with the lifetime of control our parents had wielded over him. He wanted to apologize to the children personally and work on building a genuine relationship without our parents' influence. The reunion was cautious but healing. He cried when Jake showed him his art and when Emma told him she had joined a cooking club at school. He promised to be the uncle they deserved, free from the toxic dynamics that had poisoned our family. I started a blog about surviving toxic grandparents, initially as therapy for myself, but it quickly gained a following. Hundreds of parents reached out with similar stories of grandparents who weaponized love, used legal systems for control, and damaged children while claiming to protect them. I shared resources for documenting abuse, finding appropriate lawyers, and protecting children's mental health during family conflicts. The blog became a support network for families navigating similar situations. 1 year after that horrible Christmas Eve, we celebrated the holiday our way. The children decorated cookies without anyone commenting on eating them. Jake made ornaments for everyone featuring their favorite colors and interests. Tyler performed a Christmas song he had learned in speech therapy, hitting every word perfectly. Emma wore a dress she had picked out herself, twirling without concern for how it fit. Tom and I watched our children laugh and play, free from criticism and fear. The legal aftermath continued with the HIPAA violation investigation resulting in criminal charges against my parents' friend and significant fines for the medical practice. My parents faced civil penalties and were required to complete court-mandated therapy, though we heard from mutual acquaintances that they spent most sessions insisting they were victims. They never showed genuine remorse or understanding of the harm they had caused, confirming that our no-contact decision was the right one. Melissa and I became close friends through this ordeal. She divorced Scott amicably, recognizing that they both needed to heal from their respective family traumas separately. She had been documenting her own in-laws' controlling behavior and used similar strategies to protect her children. We often reflected on how documentation and evidence had saved our children from continued abuse. Our phones had indeed become shields protecting the next generation from repeating painful patterns. The extended family gradually reformed around healthier dynamics. Cousins who had experienced similar treatment reached out to share their stories and rebuild relationships without the older generation's toxic influence. We created a new holiday schedule that rotated between homes, sharing hosting duties and ensuring no one person controlled family gatherings. The children grew up with cousins who celebrated their differences rather than competing over who best met arbitrary standards. 3 years later, I received word that my father had passed away from a heart attack. The funeral was divided into 2 services because the family couldn't gather together. I didn't attend, but I allowed the children to write letters if they wanted. Only Tyler chose to, writing simply that he forgave Grandpa for not understanding that words could hurt and hoping he had found peace. It was more grace than Robert had ever shown him, evidence that we had successfully broken the cycle. My mother lived another 5 years, reportedly growing more bitter and isolated as family members maintained boundaries or cut contact entirely. She died insisting she had done nothing wrong, that she had only wanted what was best for her grandchildren. Linda never understood that her version of best was actually harmful control dressed up as love. The inheritance she had held over everyone's heads was mostly depleted from legal fees, a fitting end to her attempts at financial manipulation. Looking back now, that Christmas Eve when I stood up with my phone shaking was the moment everything changed. The device that my parents had mocked me for always having in my hand became the tool that exposed their abuse and protected my children. Technology they didn't understand or respect documented truth they couldn't deny or manipulate. That simple act of pressing record had saved my children's childhood and probably their future relationships with their own children someday. The room had indeed frozen when I revealed those recordings, the careful facade of loving grandparents shattered by their own words captured forever. But from that frozen moment came movement, change, and ultimately freedom. My children learned that love doesn't require accepting abuse, that family isn't entitled to hurt you, and that sometimes protecting those you love means standing up to those who claim to love you. They saw their mother fight for them with everything she had, and they grew up knowing they were worth fighting for. Today, Emma is confident in her body and her worth, pursuing culinary arts with passion. Jake's artistic talents have flourished into a scholarship for art school, his unique perspective celebrated rather than crushed. Tyler speaks publicly about overcoming speech challenges, helping other children find their voices. They all maintain careful boundaries in relationships, recognizing red flags of manipulation and control. The scars remain but no longer define them. Tom and I sometimes reflect on how different life might have been if we had stayed silent, if I hadn't trusted my instincts to document the abuse. The price of peace would have been our children's self-esteem, their spirits slowly crushed by grandparents who claimed love while showing cruelty. That price was too high. The family we lost was replaced by one we chose, built on respect and genuine care rather than obligation and control. Our children grew up surrounded by people who celebrated them rather than trying to fix them. The blog evolved into a book about protecting children from toxic grandparents, reaching thousands of families trapped in similar situations. I receive messages regularly from parents who found strength to stand up to family abuse after reading our story. Many share how they too discovered that documentation was their salvation, that phones and recordings became shields against gaslighting and manipulation. The tools our parents' generation dismisses as impersonal technology became the very things that preserved truth and protected innocence. Sometimes protecting your children means standing up to your own parents, accepting that the people who raised you might harm those you're raising. It means choosing your children's well-being over family harmony, their safety over others' comfort. My phone saved us by capturing truth that couldn't be denied or twisted, but courage set us free. The courage to press record, to stand up in that frozen room, to choose my children over my parents' approval. That courage came from love, the real kind that protects rather than controls, that celebrates rather than criticizes, that helps children bloom rather than forcing them into predetermined shapes. Our story isn't unique, sadly. Across the world, parents face similar battles with grandparents who believe their age grants them wisdom and rights that supersede their children's parental authority. But our victory shows that documentation, legal support, and unwavering commitment to our children's well-being can triumph over generational abuse. The cycle can be broken. Children can be protected. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to stand up with your phone and say enough is enough. What would you do if your family turned holiday gatherings into emotional warfare against your children? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your kids? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about standing up for what's right, protecting our children, and breaking cycles of family dysfunction. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic grandparents. Remember, documenting abuse isn't betrayal, it's protection. Thank you for watching, and may your holidays be filled with genuine love and respect, not control masquerading as caring. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never apologize for protecting your children.